Thank you very much indeed, Martin. Now we move on to Gail Suter, who leads for the NFU on CAP. Gail's got a background. She started off in NFU Scotland, and she's been working for us in the BAB office in Brussels. And I think you've probably done getting on for 100 meetings with farmers talking around CAP reform. And it's incredibly valuable because I have sort of some issues that are brought to my attention when Gail comes back from sort of right across England and Wales and the concerns that are picked up. It's really important that we understand where those unintended consequences from the original proposals are playing out, and Gail's been in charge of giving a very strong backing to those concerns. Gail, over to you.
Thank you very much, President. What I would like to start with this morning is to set out what the NFU's vision for the future of the CAP policy should be. Whilst our farmers continue to operate within the single market, it's going to be really important that we operate within a system of common rules. Only this week I heard one of the French presidential candidates talking about scrapping the Common Agricultural Policy and replacing it with a French agricultural policy. I think it's policies like that around the EU 27 that we have to be concerned about, which is why we need to have a strong common European agricultural policy. And within that policy, we want it to be very much focused on the competitiveness of agriculture in a sustainable way. We've heard the concerns expressed by other speakers today and yesterday. We need to increase production, but we need to do it sustainably. We want that positive framework to bring farmers forward to a place where you're less dependent on public support payments and that you are able to derive more of your income from fair and well-functioning markets. Our judgment of the Commission's proposals when they came on the table last October are based on 4 key principles. And these have been set out in our NFU policy from 2010. Those principles are commonality, simplification, market orientation, and greater competitiveness. As Peter said, in the time since the Commission published its proposals, the NFU, both staff and office holders, have presented the proposals widely to our members. And I'm very pleased to hear that elected officials, that civil servants over the last couple of days have very much picked up some of the concerns that you as members have been expressing to us and that we have been delivering to these key decision makers on your behalf. But in such a short space of time that I have available this morning, what I would like to do is very much focus on one area of the package which is causing a great deal of concern to our members, and that is this idea of greening of the direct payments. We've already heard this morning that the greening of direct payments is inevitable, and we agree with the Commission that there is certainly a role for the environment within the CAP so that they can deliver these so-called public goods and be fairly recompensed for that action. But it's a question of how you do that, and how to do that in a way which doesn't hinder agricultural production and your primary role to produce food for a growing population and increasing demand. If we just briefly recap on the Commission's proposals for greening the direct payments. In order to unlock your basic payment, you will have to carry out 3 mandatory actions, those actions that are relevant to your farm business. These are mandatory actions. There is no option. We've had it confirmed from the European Commission that if you choose not to do these actions, that would be deemed, in some cases, to be deliberate non-compliance. It could result in up to 100% exclusion from the basic payments, from the direct payments. But if we just touch on these mandatory actions, crop diversification, whereby you have to grow 3 different crops if you have more than 3 hectares of arable land. Retention of permanent grassland, so the land that you declare in 2014 would be fossilised, as the Commissioner described the situation yesterday, our words, possibly not his. And this idea that farmers would have to devote 7% of arable land and permanent crop land to ecological focus areas. Across the whole of the country, each of these 3 measures have been throwing up their own perversities and unintended consequences. And when taken as a whole, what we're very concerned about is this mandatory nature of the greening proposals. We have a very successful history in terms of uptake of agri-environment schemes, and we are extremely concerned that this mandatory nature will undermine that voluntary approach and the goodwill that has been built up in the industry across the last 20 years. And if we just touch on some of that goodwill and some of the results that we have achieved thus far. As I say, we've got a very good track history in terms of uptake of agri-environment schemes. 68% of England's farmland is managed through an agri-environment scheme. That's 6.3 million hectares, or an area equivalent, Mr. De Castro, of half of Italy's agricultural land. So it's an extremely significant area that is under active environmental management. Year on year, we have seen pesticides usage decline by 41% since 1990. We've seen ammonia emissions decline by 22% since 1990. In regards to climate change, we have seen methane and nitrous oxide emissions decline by 19% and 23% respectively. So I think that is some things that as a farming industry we certainly should be very proud of, and that is just a small selection of some of the things that we have already achieved, primarily through the industry voluntary approach. Now, if we take the Commission's proposals once again and we drill down into each of the three measures, and we identify some of the perversities and unintended consequences that we're hearing from you guys on the ground. Take a livestock farmer or a dairy farmer who's a small area of arable land, possibly for home consumption. He will now have to grow a third crop in order to meet the 3-crop requirement, regardless of whether he has the kit, the storage, the suitable conditions to be able to grow other crops. Or a specialist horticulture producer who is growing to contract, and he has to deliver that contract or he will face penalties. He will have to take on additional land, or he will have to find somewhere else to get a supply to fulfill that contract. A strawberry grower who has multi-annual crops. Strawberry plants don't fulfill the requirements of being in the ground for 5 years, so they don't fall under the derogation afforded to permanent crops. Come 2014, there will be a situation where strawberry growers may have to rip out strawberry plants from the ground in order to fulfill this 3-crop requirement and to fulfill the minimum and maximum requirements that go along with it. You have dairy farmers, again, or livestock farmers, who have areas of permanent grassland. They face the prospect of being locked down as grassland farmers forevermore under these proposals, regardless of the economic situation, whether they are able to continue in dairy, whether they're able to continue supplying a creamery that perhaps is going to close. This is a very blunt mechanism to basically limit the options that farmers have available to them in order to respond to market signals. Set aside 7% of ecological focus areas. Now, okay, granted, perhaps the Commissioner thinks that it's not set aside, that we're not asking farmers to set aside 7% of land. There are edges and hedges out there, and it was very pleasing to hear the Commissioner say yesterday that he will consider allowing areas of ineligible organic features to come back onto maps and to become eligible once again for this ecological focus areas. But on our best estimates, we don't think that there is a huge percentage of these edges and hedges out there. We think possibly 2%. There's 2% of uncropped land. So if we take that aside, if we take that 7%, take it down to 5%, and say, okay, well, the requirement is actually going to mean 5% of productive land being needed to set aside. That, at a UK level, is still 300,000 hectares, an area equivalent to Cambridgeshire and Bedfordshire put together. Can we really afford to set aside that amount of production at a time when stocks-to-use ratios are extremely tight? I think our pig and poultry members would certainly say that that is not the case. The Commission's own impact assessment puts the impact of greening as a result of increased prices in a range of up to a decline of 25% in terms of income per farm worker. That is incredible. We need a fundamental rethink of the design of greening. As previous speakers have said, greening in Pillar 1 is inevitable. It's a question of how you do it. We need to move away from what are classed as land-hungry and restrictive measures. And we need to move forward to a system which is going to recognise what it is that farmers are already achieving in terms of environmental sustainability. And at the same time, that will contribute to the economic performance of the business so that we are able, as I said at the start, to move to a place where we are less reliant on the public support payments. For this to happen, we need both the European Parliament and the European Council to make amendments to the Commission's proposals. First of all, what we need is a rethink about this mandatory nature. We need this to be a genuine incentive payment, not a form of super cross-compliance. And certainly, we need a very close look at the sanctions and penalties that would apply if a farmer possibly breached. Possibly he didn't quite meet the requirements of greening. What sort of penalties will he require? So we need a fundamental rethink in terms of focusing this back on being a genuine incentive payment rather than being a stick through super cross-compliance. Second, we need the list of farmers who will benefit from an exemption from greening. At the moment, the Commission includes organic farmers, to be expanded to include agri-environment scheme farmers. Now, I appreciate that there are concerns about double fundings, but I'm hearing a lot of member states saying that they want to see recognition for the efforts that have been done through agri-environment schemes, specifically built into the system of greening. So we are in a negotiation. We do have to think about the art of the possible, and we certainly need to continue to push that those farmers who have gone above and beyond in terms of the baseline should be recognised through a specific exemption. Saying that, it's not a panacea for all. We would want that exemption to cover also farmers who are undertaking voluntary actions for the environment, so possibly through the Campaign for the Farmed Environment. And of course, there will be some farmers who, for whatever reason, possibly land tenure, they are unable to access long-term agri-environment commitments. So it's certainly not, having a derogation is not the panacea for all. And therefore, we still need to focus on the three measures that have been put forward by the European Commission, and we need to have amendments which will remove the most distorting and perverse aspects of them. So we need that crop diversification measure deleted entirely. It's recoupling by the back door. We need the focus of permanent grassland to be taken from short and medium-term grass lays, your 6-7 year grass lays, taken up to a level where we're looking at protecting high-quality biodiverse grasslands, possibly through the environmental impact assessment regulation that we currently have in our cross-compliance. And certainly of critical importance, and again I'm pleased that the Commissioner mentioned this yesterday, it is vitally important that farmers are able to improve the fertility of their grasslands by reseeding, by ploughing and cultivating. So that's a very important aspect that we shouldn't forget. And we need the area to be included in these ecological focus areas significantly reduced. The 7% is absolutely intolerable, and if we are talking about these areas that the Commissioner is alluding to as being non-productive areas, the edges and hedges, like I say, we're very concerned that actually there's not that quantity of these features out on farm. So we need to have a real look at what is an acceptable level, if any at all, to be setting aside on farms. There are alternatives to the Commission's three common measures being worked up in both the European Parliament and the European Council. And I certainly hope that some of the aspects that Tim Benton raised in his speech this morning in terms of business win-wins, looking at nutrient management, looking at precision farming, will be part of that alternative approach. We are slightly concerned because these alternative approaches do include a large degree of flexibility for member states. Now, we are open to considering alternatives, but greater member state flexibility does worry us. We have heard DEFRA ministers in the past talking about the need for greening to be more ambitious, that it needs to deliver more for the UK's own environmental objectives. The UK government wants to be the greenest government ever, so I think we know that the level of ambition is certainly very high. We heard from the President yesterday that the UK currently receives the lowest per hectare share of rural development funds across the whole of the EU. And I think this graph illustrates that very well. I'm not sure if you're able to read the names of each of the member states. You've got Slovenia, Portugal, Austria over here on the left-hand side. And then you have Wales and England over on the extreme right-hand side to illustrate the point. Now, the reason that we are over there is because of the reluctance of successive governments to draw down what would be discretionary European funds in light of the impact that that would have on the UK's rebate. And this is then compounded by the ongoing use by the European Commission of a historical allocation key. Now, to compensate for that poor allocation, we know what the UK does. The UK applies voluntary modulation. So no wonder we get nervous when we hear DEFRA talking about greater flexibility. And we hear them talking about greater flexibility to effectively modulate money from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, and at the same time talk about an ambitious greening. Our bottom line that's been expressed to me by the members is very much that we need to have a UK government that's going to seek to negotiate a balanced outcome and that will not put UK, English and Welsh farmers at a disadvantage within that common framework and within that single market. So in conclusion, we have a very long way to go in the negotiations. I have been heartened by the interventions of quite a few speakers over the last couple of days. There does appear to be a willingness in Brussels to listen to concerns. Some of those concerns have already been taken up and addressed. We need the European Parliament and the European Council to do what I'm afraid the European Commission has failed to do in trying to please everybody, and that is to produce a coherent set of regulations at the end of this process, that are simple and that encourage sustainable productivity, that focus on modern productive agriculture, and that allow you guys as farmers to be able to rise to that challenge of sustainable intensification. And within those negotiations, as I say, we need to have a UK government that will champion what it is that farmers have already achieved. We should be proud of our past records, not just for nature and biodiversity, but also for wider environmental concerns. We need to move away from those land-hungry and restrictive measures. Critically, Chairman, we need to have a UK government, as I say, that is looking to provide the right framework for you guys to become less reliant on public support and are able to move forward to a place where we are able to drive more of our income from a fair and functioning market. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.